They didn't want you to fight back. They just never thought you'd win. Because history doesn't remember the quiet ones who kept their heads down. It remembers the disruptors, the defiers, the ones who were counted out, until they kicked the door in and rewrote the rules while still bleeding. Let's get this straight. You weren't supposed to rise. You weren't supposed to clap back with clarity. You weren't supposed to flip the script and have them stuck in the background of your victory shot. And yet, here we are. Here's a fact they don't want to admit. Most talk is just panic in disguise. They didn't gossip because you failed. They gossiped because you didn't stay there. You didn't crumble for their entertainment. You calculated, evolved, then came back unrecognizable and undefeated. Now you've got their mouths open and their timelines quiet. And the truth is, the same people who swore they knew you now watch you like a documentary. So what really happened? You fought back, but not just with hands, with purpose, with precision, with prophecy. And that's why you didn't just survive, you made history. Number one, they expected scars, not strategy, but you came back with a blueprint. They expected you to come back broken, scattered, maybe even silent. They thought the fire would burn you down, not burn something new into you. But when you returned, you didn't show up with sob stories or scars begging for sympathy. You came back with structure, with sharp eyes, with a plan. You didn't just survive what they threw at you. You studied it, broke it apart, took notes, then rebuilt yourself smarter, sharper, and far more dangerous than they ever saw coming. Most people come back from betrayal or failure hoping to be accepted again. You didn't. You came back calculated. You didn't fight fire with fire. You became the architect of your own fire. Every breakdown became a building block. Every insult became an ingredient in your comeback formula. And while they were busy laughing, underestimating you, or waiting for you to fold, you were quietly building a system around your pain, a system they can't crack because they never saw it coming. You didn't return to prove them wrong. You came back to prove yourself right. There's a difference. You didn't crave validation, you built vision. You learned the game they tried to weaponize against you, then rewrote the rules. They were playing checkers, you were playing chess with a blueprint you carved out of every dark moment they left you in. That's what they never prepared for. They expected weakness in your return. What they got was a version of you that had studied every angle, every silence, every betrayal, and turned it into data. They expected scars, but you came back as a strategist, and now they don't know how to deal with you because you're no longer reacting. You're building, leading, creating, moving differently. You fought back, yes, but with vision, not vengeance. And that's what made your return not just a comeback, but a calculated takeover. Number two, they wrote you off because they couldn't read depth. They counted you out not because you were weak, but because they couldn't understand you. You were never too much. They were just too shallow to handle your depth. They couldn't grasp your silence, your moves, your mindset, or your way of seeing the world. So instead of asking deeper questions, they made shallow assumptions. They weren't qualified to read you, so they rewrote you in their heads as something smaller, something safer, something they could explain. But what they labeled as confusing was really just rare. What they called weird was wisdom, disguised in a form they'd never encountered before. You moved differently, spoke with intention, paused where others rushed and listened when others just wanted noise. That's why they misunderstood you, because you were operating on levels that couldn't be measured by surface standards. While they chased approval, you chased purpose. While they clung to trends, you stayed rooted in truth. And when someone can't access the layers you carry, their first instinct is to mislabel you. That's not your fault. That's their limitation. You didn't fit into their small talk or shallow circles. Your presence made them uncomfortable, not because you were rude or loud, but because you were aware. And awareness exposes everything fake around it. You saw too much, felt too deep, and thought too long-term. And that kind of energy doesn't blend in. It stands out. It shakes things up. It makes people confront parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. They weren't ready for someone like you. They didn't know what to do with someone who refused to water themselves down, so they talked. They gossiped. They judged. Not because you were wrong, but because your presence was proof that something greater was possible. And that scared them. You were never the problem. They just didn't have the language to understand the force you were becoming. Number 3, you didn't clap back. You climbed higher. You didn't argue. You didn't explain. You didn't waste your energy proving anything to anyone. While they were busy throwing shots, trying to get a reaction, you were busy rising. And that's what shook them most. You didn't clap back, you climbed. You didn't match their noise with more noise. You made moves in silence that screamed louder than any response ever could. You realized early that every minute spent trying to defend yourself was a minute taken from building yourself. So instead of feeding into their chaos, you fed your growth. They expected a meltdown. They expected you to spiral, to respond, to go off like they would have. But your power was in your self-control. You mastered your emotions, protected your peace, and kept your vision ahead of their drama. That kind of discipline isn't weakness. It's warfare. Because the truth is, nothing disrupts a petty crowd more than watching the one they tried to break level up without acknowledging them once. You weren't ignoring them because you were afraid. You were too focused. You had bigger things to fight for than pride. You chose elevation over reaction, and that's why they still talk while you keep rising. You moved differently, not because you didn't feel the disrespect, but because you knew your energy was too expensive to spend on people who thrive off chaos. And now they're stuck replaying the moment they lost access to you. Because once you chose growth, you became unreachable to the version of them that needed you to stay small. Your silence wasn't weakness. It was strategy. You weren't passive, you were patient. You understood that real power isn't proven in loud moments. It's revealed in how you handle what's beneath you. And now that you've risen, they're finally starting to realize you never needed to clap back when you were busy building something they could never reach. Number 4, you made history because you didn't let hurt define you. You let it refine you. They expected you to fall apart, to disappear quietly, to stay stuck in the story they wrote for you. But you did something they didn't see coming. You used the hurt to heal, not to harden. You didn't deny the pain. You felt every bit of it. You cried, you questioned, you doubted. But you didn't get stuck there. Instead of letting betrayal define your identity, you let it refine your character. You took everything they did to break you and used it to sharpen you. You didn't build walls. You built wisdom. You learned who was real, who was seasonal, and who only loved you when you were easy to love. And with that clarity you grew. You stopped giving loyalty to people who never deserved your energy in the first place. You started protecting your peace like it was sacred because now you understood it was. The pain didn't make you bitter, it made you better at seeing, at feeling, at choosing. You stopped needing closure and started creating freedom. You stopped begging for understanding and started building from what you understood about yourself. That's why your story didn't end in bitterness, it evolved into something powerful. Because you weren't trying to get even. You were getting elevated. Pain didn't own you, it taught you. It refined your vision, your voice, your value. You weren't defined by the betrayal, you were clarified by it. You found out what you were really made of when everything fake around you fell away. And that's when the shift happened. That's when the history started being made, because people can copy style, mimic language, and fake support. But they can't fake what you've survived. They can't replicate what you've rebuilt. They'll talk about how you made it, but they'll never really understand what it cost you to stay true while breaking. You didn't just heal, you transformed. And that's why the pain didn't destroy you. It crowned you. Number 5, you didn't just fight. You transcended the fight. You didn't waste your time trying to win arguments or outshout anyone. You weren't interested in proving you're tougher, louder, or more dramatic. You weren't fighting just to fight. You were operating on a whole different level. You looked at the chaos, the betrayal, the attacks, and instead of throwing punches back, you paused and studied. You didn't react. You refined. You knew that swinging blindly only wears you out and proves nothing. So while they were busy attacking you, you were mastering your own triggers. You stopped giving your emotions away for free. That's where everything shifted. You realized the real battle wasn't about them, it was about you. Not the version of you that wanted revenge, but the version of you that was built for greater. You started controlling your response, choosing your battles, protecting your mind. You didn't just want to win moments, you wanted to win yourself. And that's exactly what you did. You stopped being predictable. You stopped moving in ways they expected. You learned how to read the room, read yourself, and respond from a place of strength, not survival. While others were reacting from pain, you were making decisions from purpose. You learned that anyone can fight emotionally, But not everyone can fight intelligently, and intelligence wins long term. You outgrew the fight because you realized the real power wasn't in who could hit harder, but in who could grow deeper. You walked away from things that once triggered you, not because you were weak, but because they no longer deserved your energy. You didn't fight for attention. You elevated for peace. You weren't just trying to win the round, you were building a legacy. That's what they never saw coming. You didn't just survive the battle, you transcended it. And now you don't just look different, you move different, because once you master yourself, nothing outside of you can master you again. Number 6, they laughed at the process, but now they study the product. They laughed when you started, called it a phase, said you were reaching. They rolled their eyes at your discipline, your boundaries, your silence. They mocked your small beginnings, your awkward stages, your lonely seasons. They joked about how deep you got, how different you acted, how serious you took your growth. But you didn't explain, you didn't argue, you just kept building. They saw the grind but couldn't see the vision, so they dismissed you. They confused consistency with confusion. They thought your sacrifices were signs you were failing. They didn't understand why you stopped showing up to certain places, why you cut off the noise, or why you no longer responded the way you used to. To them it looked like you were losing. But you weren't losing. You were leveling up. Now look, the same ones who laughed, they're watching closely. They're quoting your lines, sharing your words, asking how you did it. They want to know your formula, your mindset, your secret. Because now the results are undeniable. You didn't just glow up, you grew up. You didn't post every move, but now your life is speaking louder than any caption ever could. You became what they never saw coming, a reference, a walking example, a blueprint. You turned the pain, the process, the pruning into purpose. And now the same mouths that once doubted you use your journey as motivation. The same ones who said, "Who does this person think they are?" now ask, "How did they pull that off?" You didn't become a trend, you became truth. You turned pressure into principles. You took every L in private and turned it into a legacy in public. Now you're not just seen, you're studied. You became curriculum. And the wildest part is, you're still just getting started. Number 7, you chose legacy over lashing out. You had every reason to clap back. You had the receipts, you had the words, you had the perfect moment to embarrass the people who tried to play you. And honestly, no one would have blamed you if you did, but you didn't. You let it go. Not because you were weak, but because you were locked into something bigger than revenge. You weren't trying to prove a point. You were building one. You realized fast that pettiness is cheap and legacy is expensive. It costs time, energy, and a level of discipline most people just don't have. You saw the trap, how easy it is to get sucked into drama, to live in reaction mode, to fight over things that don't even matter long term. But you had vision, you had work to do, and you understood this one truth: you can't build your future and babysit your past at the same time. So you took the high road, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. You let your moves do the talking. You stopped responding to shade and started responding to strategy. And that's why your name still carries weight long after the noise faded. You didn't go viral for being petty. You became unforgettable for being powerful. While others were wasting time throwing shots, you were planting seeds. And now the fruit is showing. Your results speak in rooms where your name was once disrespected. The same people who tried to write you off now whisper your name like a rumor, trying to act like they always saw it in you. But they didn't. They just didn't expect you to outgrow the mess and outlast them. You left the clapbacks to the crowd. You chose legacy, and now their stories disappeared, but yours is still unfolding. You didn't just win, you elevated, and that's a different kind of flex. Number 8. They wanted a reaction. You gave a revolution. They poked, pushed, and prodded, waiting for you to break character. They wanted the old version of you, the one that would have snapped, clapped back, lost control, and gave them a show. They fed off chaos, hoping you'd self-destruct in front of an audience. But what they didn't expect was your evolution. They didn't know you had matured past the point of reacting to low-level noise. You weren't ignoring them because you were afraid. You had simply outgrown the need to entertain anything beneath your purpose. You saw it for what it was, a trap, a distraction, an invitation to step out of alignment. And instead of taking the bait, you pivoted. You turned inward, you turned upward, and you turned the whole thing around. They wanted a reaction, but you started a revolution, not just in how you moved, but in who you became. You didn't just stay calm, you strategized. You didn't lash out, you leveled up. That pivot changed everything. Because now they're still stuck in the same cycle, still looking for someone to drag into their storm, while you've shifted timelines. You're in rooms they'll never enter, working on things their minds can't even comprehend. Your vision is no longer reactive, it's generational. Your movements aren't about survival anymore, they're about legacy. They wanted drama. You built direction. They wanted noise. You built momentum. The thing they couldn't understand is this: composure is a weapon. Remaining grounded while everything around you tries to shake you is power in its purest form. You didn't win by fighting harder. You won by refusing to fight small. You mastered yourself, and because of that, nothing they said or did could control you anymore. You flipped the script entirely. And now, you're not just walking in power, you are the shift. The revolution they tried to provoke ended up setting you free and leaving them watching, wondering and whispering. Number 9, you didn't get even. You got elevated. You could have gone after them. You could have exposed, embarrassed and dragged them through the same mud they tried to bury you in. And no one would have blamed you. You had every reason to get even, but you didn't. You didn't waste your time chasing payback. You used that time to build something better. You let the pain push you, not poison you. And that decision, that's what changed everything. You realized early on that revenge might feel good for a moment, but elevation lasts. You weren't trying to match their energy. You were trying to outgrow the environment that produced it. Retaliation would have kept you tied to the very people and places you were meant to rise above. So instead, you disappeared into growth. You reworked your mind, you rebuilt your habits, you healed, you stretched, and you transformed in silence until you became someone they could no longer access, affect, or understand. They were looking for a reaction, but you were creating a reinvention. And while they were still talking about who you used to be, you were already 10 levels past it. That's the real revenge, showing up so evolved, so elevated, so grounded in who you've become that they don't even know how to approach you anymore. They expected you to retaliate. What they didn't expect was for you to become unreachable, unshakable, unrecognizable in the best way. You made yourself untouchable not by fighting back, but by rising up. You outgrew the battlefield entirely, and that's why they still watch, still wonder, still talk, but can't touch you. You didn't get even. You got free. You got focused. You got elevated. And now your story isn't one of petty revenge, it's one of powerful rebirth. You didn't just survive what tried to break you. You reinvented yourself until nothing from that level could ever pull you back again. Number 10, you didn't just break generational chains, you became the blacksmith. You didn't just walk away from the dysfunction, you confronted it, head on. You looked the generational mess in the eye and said, "It ends with me." You didn't excuse it, you didn't sugarcoat it. You saw the patterns for what they were: inherited pain disguised as tradition, normalized trauma passed off as personality, cycles dressed up as culture. And instead of repeating them, you dismantled them. Piece by piece, quietly, boldly, relentlessly. You weren't just breaking chains, you were learning how they were made. You studied the silence, the secrets, the self-sabotage. You became fluent in the emotional languages your family never taught you. You chose healing over hiding, responsibility over resentment. You got tired of watching people normalize suffering and call it strength. So you did the work they avoided for decades, not for applause, but because future generations deserved something better than just survival. You didn't just want freedom for yourself. You wanted freedom to start with you. You knew that breaking the cycle was one part, but building something new was the real mission. And that's exactly what you did. You became the blacksmith, the builder, the one who not only snapped the chains but melted them down and forged something entirely new. New mindsets, new standards, new language for love, leadership and healing. You created safety where there was once silence. You created honesty where there was once avoidance. You created a future that wasn't shaped by fear. And no, it wasn't easy. It was lonely, confusing and heavy at times. But you didn't back down because you knew what was at stake. You weren't just protecting your peace. You were protecting the generations that would come after you. You didn't just stop the pain from continuing. You gave the future something worth continuing. That's what makes you different. You weren't just a chain breaker. You became a legacy builder, a cycle creator. Number 11, you became proof that resurrection isn't just spiritual, it's strategic. They saw your silence and thought it meant defeat. They saw your isolation and assumed you'd given up. They thought that because things fell apart, you did too. But what they didn't know was that your comeback wasn't accidental. It was intentional. What looked like the end was really just the pause before the rise. You weren't dead, you were being developed. While they were counting you out, you were counting the cost. You weren't buried, you were planted. And every moment you spent underground was preparation, not punishment. You didn't come back just to be seen. You came back with a plan, with wisdom, with fire in your spirit and structure in your steps. Your resurrection didn't happen by chance, it happened by choice. You made daily decisions to rebuild yourself when no one was clapping. You created systems for your soul. You set boundaries. You got honest about your patterns. You studied your own pain like a blueprint, and then you built something from it that no one could take credit for but God. That's why your return hits different. You're not just surviving, you're strategic. You didn't wake up healed one day, you fought for it, you dug for it, you bled for clarity. You created a framework out of the very things that were meant to destroy you. Your glow-up wasn't cosmetic, it was calculated. Resurrection isn't just about rising, it's about rising with direction. They thought your story was over because they didn't understand your root system. You were never the type to quit. You just go quiet when you're working. And when you rose again, it wasn't to prove a point, it was to fulfill a purpose. That's why your presence carries weight now. It's not just spiritual, it's strategic. Your rebirth wasn't loud, but it was legendary. Because you didn't just come back different, you came back designed. Number 12, you didn't escape hell, you learned how to govern it. You didn't get out clean, you didn't float your way to healing. You crawled, bruised and bleeding through seasons that tried to swallow you whole. There were days you barely recognized yourself, days where the weight felt unbearable, where the silence was loud and your faith was shaky. But still, you didn't tap out. You didn't just survive hell, you studied it. You understood its language, its traps, its patterns. And in doing so, you gained something far more powerful than escape. You gained dominion. That's the part people don't see. They see the strength, but not the source. They feel your weight, but not your wounds. What they don't realize is that your authority isn't borrowed, it's earned. Every scar came with a revelation. Every dark moment became a masterclass. You learned how to stand firm in storms that others get swept away by. And that's why when you enter a room, things shift, because you're not just showing up, you're carrying something. You walk in with memory, with history, with spiritual receipts. You didn't just pass through the fire, you became forged by it. You didn't escape hell, you learned how to govern it. You don't just pray cute prayers, you speak from experience. You don't offer shallow encouragement, you speak from deep survival. And when you open your mouth, it shakes things, not because you're trying to impress, but because you've earned the right to speak from that place. You don't need a title to have authority. You are the evidence. Your presence alone confronts things in people they've been avoiding. That's why you disrupt atmospheres. That's why your energy feels heavy. It's layered with things you've overcome. Hell tried to break you, but it ended up building something in you that can't be manufactured. You're not walking around with borrowed strength. You walk with the kind of depth that only comes from making it out of battles no one knew you were fighting. And that's why your name has weight now. Not because of who you pretend to be, but because of what you survived and mastered in silence. Number 13. They talked because they couldn't comprehend the weight you carried quietly. They mistook your quiet for weakness. Thought your calm meant confusion. Labeled your absence as failure. But what they didn't realize was that while they were busy running their mouths, you were rebuilding silently. You weren't lost, you were locked in. You were processing things they'd collapse under, carrying burdens they couldn't even begin to understand. You were healing, not hiding. You were recalibrating, not retreating. And while the world around you was loud and messy, you were in the thick of your transformation, cleaning out wounds, breaking cycles, and preparing for a return that would leave no doubt. People talk the most about what they don't understand. And because they couldn't comprehend the internal warfare you were managing daily, they created their own narratives. They didn't see the weight you were carrying behind your smile. They didn't hear the battles behind your boundaries. You weren't falling apart. You were holding things together with a strength they never developed. You were carrying spiritual weight, emotional weight, generational weight, and still showing up with grace. They laughed, gossiped, speculated, but that was only because they were never built to carry what you carried. Your process confused them because it required a level of maturity they hadn't reached. It's easy to mock what you've never lived through. It's easy to minimize what you've never had to master. You weren't slow, you were sacred. You weren't late, you were layered. Now they speak because your rise demands it. Your life has become a contradiction to everything they expected. You never needed to clap back. Your very existence is the response. Because what they called disappearing was actually you entering a divine laboratory. And now, every word they spoke is being swallowed by the reality of what you've become. They couldn't carry what you carried, and that's why they talked. But you built, quietly, completely, unapologetically. Number 14, you didn't come back to be seen. You came back to shift atmospheres. You didn't come back looking for attention. You didn't need applause, validation, or permission. You weren't interested in making a scene. You were focused on making an impact. Your return wasn't about being seen. It was about being sent. You weren't trying to fit back in. You weren't trying to resume old roles. You came back to shift the entire atmosphere, to walk in with a presence so rooted, so clear, so aligned, that everything around you had to adjust. They expected a reintroduction, maybe a little noise, a few look at me now moments. But that's not your style. You don't need theatrics when you are the shift. Your presence alone interrupts comfort zones. Your growth speaks louder than any announcement. When you walk in, things move, perspectives shift, energy rearranges itself, because you didn't just heal, you evolved. You didn't just rise, you transformed. This wasn't a comeback for clout. This was a divine return with assignment in hand. The old seat you had, you outgrew it. You didn't reclaim a space, you rebuilt one, bigger, stronger, aligned with who you truly are. You didn't beg for a seat at their table. You crafted your own with room for others like you who refuse to shrink. People don't get it because they're used to folks coming back trying to prove something. But you had nothing to prove. You had purpose to fulfill. You came back not with wounds, but with wisdom. Not with bitterness, but with blueprint. You don't just take up space now. You shift the climate of it. You don't talk just to be heard. You speak and something happens, because when you've truly grown, your return doesn't look like revenge. It looks like rain. And now that you're back, nothing is going back to how it was. You didn't return to blend in. You returned to lead, to disrupt, to plant new standards in places that once doubted your value. You weren't performing, you were fulfilling prophecy. They tried to write your ending, but they had no idea they were just witnessing your awakening. What they thought was your breaking point was really your building point. You didn't just bounce back. You rebuilt different. You didn't come back to fit in. You came back to take territory. Every scar became strategy. Every betrayal became blueprint. You mastered your emotions, elevated your mindset, and stopped chasing validation the moment you realized your legacy was louder than their opinions. You didn't fight for revenge. You fought for reinvention. You didn't argue. You ascended. You let the pain shape you, not shrink you. You broke chains and became the blacksmith. You transcended the noise, the gossip, the expectations, and turned pressure into presence. That's why when you walk in now, things shift. Atmospheres respond, rooms get quiet, because you're not just a person who made it out, you're a force that reshaped everything. You didn't survive to be seen, you were sent to lead. So to every voice that tried to count you out, to every table that once denied you a seat, thank you. Because without the fire, you wouldn't have discovered your flame. And now you are the table, you are the revolution, you are the fulfilled prophecy they never expected to watch happen in real time. This wasn't a comeback, it was a coronation. If this message hit deep, don't just feel it, move with it. Like this video, if your evolution spoke louder than your pain, comment, "I am the shift." If you know you weren't just born to exist, you were born to disrupt. Share this with someone who's rising in silence, and if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button, because this isn't just content, it's confirmation. Welcome to the revolution.